Hey there, everyone. Welcome into CMS-Connected here on the Pulse Network. I am your host, Tyler Pyburn of the Pulse Network, and this is the WCM Industry's only news show. So welcome in. We're going to be, getting social today. And the reason for that is because, we're going to be hitting one of the topics that everybody is discussing right now, and that is, in fact, social media. So we've got a lot of great stuff to get to. We've got a lot of great guests. However, I've got some interesting news and some interesting things to kind of lay out there right now, and that is, Scott Lewer is in fact not joining us today. However, we do have a very worthy guest. Probably blow Scott out of the water. Scott will be back anyways, but we've got Seth Gottlieb of Lionbridge joining us right now. How you doing today?
Very well. I guess Scott's loss is my gain. I'm really happy to be here talking about social. This is the episode.
I was going to say, this is the fun episode. We're going to be all about social. We're going to have a couple of great guests on the show a little bit later on. We're going to be joined by Bonde of the Pulse Network. He is the CMO of the Pulse Network, and he's going to be talking about, content equals, excuse me, I just lost it for a second. Currency. Content equals currency. There's been a couple different ones out there right now that I wanted to talk about, but content equals currency. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit later on. But before we get into that, we of course have to thank our sponsors that do in fact make this entire show happen. First, we have Falcon Software. Now, Falcon provides web creative, e-commerce, content management, social media, and mobile solutions for organizations across the globe. And also Digital Clarity Group, which DCG is a research and advisory firm focused on navigating organizations through the digital transformation process. So with all that in mind, let's kind of get right to it. And the way we like to start off this show, Seth, I know you're well aware of, is kind of with the news and some of the top news and some of the top stories that are going really across the CMS industry. And to kick things off, let's talk about government. I know everybody's, that's hot on everybody's mind right now with the recent election, but we're going to be talking about how governments really are trying to control content on the internet. And is that really possible? And that brings us to a news item. Ron Miller on Fierce Content Management wrote an article about how even President Barack Obama cannot control content on the internet.
But in 2012, at a time when anyone with a cell phone can spread offensive views around the world with a click of a button, the notion that we can control the flow of information is obsolete.
So there you have it right there, Seth. I mean, he said it's obsolete at this point in time. In your mind, is it obsolete? Is there any way the government can control what's taking place on someone's cell phone? I mean, they're tweeting out, they're posting on Facebook, they're basically running content on the internet.
Sure. I mean, I hope it's obsolete. I hope it's been obsolete since the Constitution was written, because that's not really the government's job. And the way he's saying that, it's almost like he's disappointed, and what's up with that? But anyway, I guess the question is, can government control content? And probably I would say no, and that's his point right there. And that's never been the case, where there's always been dissident voices in any type of oppressive regime or anything. This is really a matter of terms of use policies on the social networks. So the social network is creating a community, creates guidelines for people that are participating on that social network, and it's really up to them to define those guidelines so it's acceptable to most of the membership and enforce them.
So what about in a case, say, like WikiLeaks? I mean, this is one of the most notable substances where people are basically publishing classified documents, putting it out there for anybody to grab a hold of. I mean, doesn't that have to be governed or no?
I don't think you can govern it.
Really?
I mean, there's really no way. I mean, if they shut down the internet, it goes to the copy machines, and we see faxes again. People spend money on fax toner. There will always be a way to get around those leaks.
Yeah, there's one way or another to truly get around it. So with all that in mind, I mean, it's truly, I hate to say it, a free-for-all, but anybody can, in fact, publish anything and everything. I mean, like you said, that's the constitutional right that everybody has right now. So, and to your point, as you mentioned right there, when we just heard that soundbite from President Barack Obama, he almost did sound disappointed in that. I mean, what was your take on that in a sense?
Well, I think he has
Without
to
getting too political.
You have to sound a little bit disappointed, because we're all disappointed when people use their right to free speech.
And abuse.
Yeah, use it in ways that hurts people. And that's a sad thing, but I don't think it's isolated to that incident. It happens all the time. It's just about focusing your attention to the channels that uphold the terms of use that you're comfortable with.
Now, what about for brands? What can brands kind of take note from this? I mean, you mentioned, policy. I mean, I think that the same kind of remains true for brands saying, hey, we have a company policy, and here's how we expect people to utilize social media, how we expect our employees to say, all right, hey, if you're working for us, if I'm handing you a paycheck at the end of the week, you need to abide by the rules, which is the company policy, not just, what kind of dress code you're going to be having, but more along the lines of, here's what you can and can't tweet, and here's what you can't publish out there, right?
Yeah, sure, that's delicate ground, because ultimately you want to have your employees, when they are working with social media, be genuine. They want, the ideal social media is people talking about how they feel to their connections, to their friends. And if you overregulate, you lose that authenticity. But every company needs a social media policy that at least sets some ground rules to say, wait, you've just stepped over the line. So every company needs one, and it needs to be flexible enough to allow people to adapt the message to something that they're comfortable socializing with, but it can't be too restrictive.
There's going to be an awful lot of gray area.
Exactly. But
really
any
is.
Communication is gray area. That's communication.
You have to note that.
Yeah.
No question about that. Okay, so let's kind of move on and let's talk about mobile because, as we talk about controlling the content, really, it's imperative to discuss content management as it all comes together. Now, Ron Miller, in his article on October 15th, actually reports that in the U.S. alone, we're going to be talking about mobile devices here, that there are more cell phone subscriptions than there are people, and claims that mobile is a disruptive force for content management as it allows us to, carry our computing power basically in our pockets, at an arm's length at all times. Now, with most people really having access, to content, whether it's consumption or creation, really anywhere at this point in time, what are some of the threats companies actually can face? Moving on, what are some of those threats really?
Yeah, well, this is the second article by Ron Miller. This is the Ron Miller show.
Yeah.
Well, this article discusses about how this mobile innovation is disrupting traditional content management industry, about their products are no longer as relevant when you have different technologies, and perhaps they're not innovating fast enough to keep up with this mobile trend. And I think I remember quite some time ago I was on the show. I was talking about how mobile shouldn't have caught us all by surprise, but it really did. And when you think about this article, he talks about two trends. One is the innovator's dilemma, which is kind of happening all the time when you have an established industry that all they can do is improve their product. And then you have the challengers that are kind of coming up and getting the people that don't really appreciate the improvements that are made to the leading product. So that's happening. And then you have the CMS vendors that are not really good, or any established company is not that good at spotting trends, because a large corporation the risk of a trend's fizzling is too great for a large corporation. The large corporations don't like to fail or can't fail because it's risky, it's costly for the organization, and it's risky for the people that work in those organizations.
With that in mind, are we saying mobile is just a trend then?
No, that's the thing.
I was going to say, I mean, I think that at this point in time,
now
I think
we know it's not a trend.
Yeah.
But earlier when it was just about happening for a really long time, then it was a trend, and it could have fizzled or it could have exploded. We all expected it to explode. Now it has. Now it's a reality. But I think that the traditional vendors probably didn't respond quick enough. And there's that strategy of acquiring companies that were responsive to it. But that's only partially effective. Sometimes
I was just going to bring up that point because it seems like a lot of some of these companies that haven't made those acquisitions are still kind of trying to wrap their heads around it, trying to figure out, say, okay, so mobile's here. Are we starting with the mobile site now? Are we building out? Are we building applications?
Yeah.
Which we heard on the one of the most recent CMS-Connected when we talked about the mobile web, and we said, okay, do you start with the mobile web or do you start with application? You say you have to start with the mobile web as opposed to the application-based part of it all.
And then build, yeah.
And build up from there. But can people actually wrap their, and can different companies, can they actually wrap their heads around it if they haven't in fact already acquired another company that has already broken some ground on this?
Well, so shifting from the vendors, the CMS vendors, to the customers, the people that are using these CMSs to solve business problems, I think that the big revelation is not how many handsets are in the marketplace, how many smartphones are out there. It's the fact that some of these smartphones are a user's or a consumer's only computer.
Yeah.
That's the big piece.
Yeah.
Right.
Very true.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So if then when you kind of assume that the only exposure a consumer could have to your website would be through the mobile, then you have to think about, well, what's the bare minimum of what we want to talk about? What features do we want to give? And then build off of that for the folks that also have desktop computers, or will continue the conversation onto their desktop computers.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point out there. Yes, there's more cell phones at this point in time than there are people, but you also have to think of how much content is actually at their fingertips. I mean, I think that's the one thing to know. And we go back to the statement that we actually, as I mentioned, I'm going to keep referring back to a previous CMS-Connected when we talk about not necessarily that you need to start there, but you do in fact have to log on to your site via mobile and say, this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
This is how it works. This is how it's integrated with social channels.
If this was my only impression, would that be good enough?
Definitely. All right, I love it. Let's keep moving on, though. We're going to keep the conversation rolling. Let's go on to the next topic now. And another interesting article, it's actually on contentmanagement.com, that really talks about the differences between standard and SaaS software contracts. SaaS, software as a service contracts. That almost sounds repetitive, redundant there. One of the key points in the article actually highlights the advantage of SaaS software, which organizations can expect to receive frequent and automatic updates at really no cost, which is not possible with traditional software. And everybody loves the updates. How many times do you get an update a day? It drives me crazy. How important really, though, Seth, are these updates, the frequent updates that SaaS softwares actually require and offer? And do the companies really need them at this point in time? Or is it better to say, no, hey, we've got our platform and we're going to upgrade it in a year or in 2 years? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
I think it really depends on the software and the updates that you're getting. A security patch, I want that.
Mm-hmm.
A feature that totally disorients me, like a change to the UI, and I don't know what I'm doing anymore. All my normal operations are disrupted. Maybe I don't want that. And you get both of those. I think the other element there is that, at least in the content management world, the platform, the products themselves are platforms on which sites are built. So depending on the architecture of the platform and how well they've delineated the core platform from the customization layer, if there's poor delineation, those updates are very risky because the update will break your customization because, of course, the vendor doesn't know all the stuff that you've done on top of their platform.
Yeah.
So it could be very risky. But I think that the really interesting thing about this article is it's written from a contractual perspective, like what's different in the contract. And that part of it I absolutely loved because...
what was that?
Well, I think that the business and technology has all jumped on to SaaS, cloud and SaaS.
Yeah,
I think
it's
it's comfortable.
I mean, everybody's, we have to move to this because, like you said, it's one of those trends.
Yeah.
I mean, to our
but it's gotten
state.
beyond that where there's a comfort level.
Yeah.
So it's not like a big deal anymore. It's comfortable. But procurement, in larger companies, there's a procurement group, and there's the legal group that reviews contracts. They are a little late to the game. I think they're always lagging behind. When with services, they're not used to buying services if they're used to buying construction services or products. So they're a little bit behind. And I'm hoping that procurement groups read this article because it really sets a little bit of context about how SaaS contracts might be different from the contracts they're used to reviewing for installed software and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, take me through that step then. Really, I mean, what are some? I mean, I know we're going to go in a little bit too deep almost, but kind of take me into that.
Well, some of the big points about. Well, actually, before I go there, the story that I just had to tell was Piero Tintori from Terminal 4 used to talk about how procurement was really bad at buying software in the old days, and he said that he had to answer a question of how much radiation, or what were the radiation levels of his CMS. So it's kind of that out of touch that we're addressing. But getting to the specific points, I think that there's a lot of language which is a little bit changed about kind of ownership of data and SLAs and who work for hire. Like when you have a customization or when they enhance the product, they're kind of paying for you, you're paying for it through a subscription, but you don't own the IP that comes out of that. And that's a big difference because when you're switching from a capital investment to a regular expense, I mean, you're basically losing IP, and I think that lawyers that are used to focusing on retaining IP will react strongly to wording like that in a contract, and I think that re-education will probably be helpful. So I'm hoping this gets stuffed into the mailboxes of a lot of procurement people. I was going to say, make
sure to send it out to the procurement office for sure. That's very cool.
You have to gloss over the fact that like contentmanagement.com is owned by a SaaS CMS company.
Never mind
but you
that.
don't mention that. But it's a well-written article, and I really agree with its points.
Awesome. Very good. Okay, let's move on to the next news item that we want to touch upon, and that is like and dislike buttons. I know what you're thinking. Everybody wants a dislike button. Well, according to a new study, about 53% of you say, yeah, you really do want a dislike button. A new research study by Adobe reveals that 53% of people want a dislike button on social media channels, more often than not on things like Facebook. So Adobe launched a campaign entitled The Marketing Myth, based on research they did that highlights some interesting bits of research, including the fact that 53% of people wanted that dislike button, as I mentioned, especially on Facebook. Is not everybody interested in what others have to say or post, or really even care for that matter, or just think what they're saying is downright stupid. So do you actually think that Adobe's campaign about metrics and not myths can shape the social media channels, their dynamics, really?
Well, I think it's a great campaign, and I think that a lot of that information is very useful to marketers. And I think that the bigger piece is that, well, first of all, with all of its software acquisition, Adobe has been very clear that they're going after the CMO. Right?
Yep.
You know, they've bought basically all the different dimensions of software that CMO can possibly buy, and this shows that they're kind of going to another angle, which is kind of the strategic angle. Like, okay, you've got this capabilities. What do you do with it? Like, how do you publish content out there, and how do you measure its effectiveness, and what's your strategy? And that's an area where CMOs are really struggling. I think that.
Which we'll talk about that with Alan Bonde in just a little bit as
Yep.
far as measuring success, because I think that's the biggest thing. We're going to talk about content as currency. Well, we have to think about, okay, set a dollar amount with it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I think that's what we need to
CMOs,
go
like
to.
the expectations are sky high for marketing. Their budgets are increasing because they realize what's at stake here. And the CMOs or the marketers, a lot of them are lost. And they've even gotten past the place where they could fake it, because there's all this metrics expectation. Like you need to prove how effective you are. And in the old school of marketing, you didn't quite have that standard.
And I think one of the things, too, that will also, as mentioned, we are going to be talking about this in just a few minutes with Alan Bonde, the CMO of The Pulse. And one of the things that's interesting about it is, okay, when we're looking at this, how do you measure it? But what's the value of something like a like or a dislike? Do you say, okay, I'm putting a lot of stock on a dislike because one of my buddies happened to say, well, Tyler wrote about something stupid on the corporate blog. I'm going to dislike this. I mean, does that actually matter?
Dislike.
Yeah, exactly. Which, trust me, I know.
Yeah, and like the likes are equally ambiguous. You don't know if someone liked it because they wanted to get a coupon, or there's like that like wall type of thing.
Yeah.
So what does it really mean to have a like? And how, I guess the real currency is how it's interpreted by your audience in terms of credibility. What does that mean to have all those likes? Do visitors even care?
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we've got just one last story we're going to go ahead and get to, and then we're going to bring Alan Bonde up on set with us. So to get to this one, we're going to be talking about the evolving role of content management in modern intranets, really. Now, on October 15th, Seth Miller, CEO of Miller Systems, posted an article on CMS Wire about the evolution of a modern intranet, really. In his article, Seth highlights that intranets today are dynamic, they're social, and highly collaborative experiences that connect people to really all sorts of content, data, applications, and most importantly, to each other. So what are some of the ways that companies can actually utilize their CMS to accomplish what Seth actually mentioned intranets can do today in this day and age? Because before it was, okay, we're going to post something up and that's that. But now they can, in fact, have that almost that social feel to it in a sense.
Sure, yeah, sure. So the example in the article, which I didn't write, was a different Seth, I should start by saying, had a great example of kind of this fire drill research project where, late at night a researcher needs to gather all this information from the experts across their global business. And there's examples of setting up a blog post and gathering comments in a collaborative workspace, and all those are really useful applications of a content management system. I think what's really interesting, and what I think about is what happens to all that great information after the fire drill is over, And in that regard, I think about content management, thinking about it in the inverse, where traditional content management, you do a lot of workflow up to the point of publication, and then it's like, okay, we're done. But in social content management, I think that the point of publication up to that point needs to be absolutely frictionless, where you get things up as quick as possible. But the challenge is curation and reconciliation of all that information after publication so that you don't get a chaotic, messy social internet where a lot of companies are right now. So publishing's easy, curation is hard.
Go back to that one step, and then we'll move on. But a lot of companies do have that messy internet. Where do you start from there then? I mean, there's a big cleanup process that a lot of companies do in fact have to go through because of that.
Sure. Well, the biggest thing is a report, or RSS gives you that of all the things that have been published recently. And the key is to have people, these are the librarians, the modern day librarians, that are curating and merging things together that different groups that don't know about each other are building, and creating resource centers and information that's kind of collected in one place, but also reconciled, because sometimes you have conflicting information and sometimes there are corrections, but you don't know if you get the earlier version or the corrected version. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen dealing with all the content that's being produced there, and that's largely going to be human work. There's not a lot. I mean, you can say that you figure it out with a search engine, but search engine is not going to be able to tell if something is factually wrong in one document versus another document.
Definitely. You have to start somewhere. You really do. Okay, let's move on. Let's get on to the guest segment right now, and that's going to be bringing up Alan Bonde, the CMO of the Pulse Network. And we're going to be talking all about social media. Now, there's tons of different website publications out there that really discuss things like social media and how it affects, the marketing agenda for a lot of different companies out there. Now, one post in particular that we actually happened to catch upon was a business to community article. It actually highlighted that a company's social media strategy won't work unless you have, 1, a strong web presence, which social media actually beefs up, 2, you know your audience, and 3, have a content strategy. But they all kind of work hand in hand with one another. Now, with that said, joining us in studio, as I mentioned, is the CMO of the Pulse Network, Alan Bonde. And Alan, in a recent Forbes.com article, as well as one of your latest speeches at the Inbound Marketing Summit, you talked and you kind of brought it up, and I've been able to hear this a couple times now, is content as currency. Content equals currency. Explain that for me a little bit. Define that. What exactly does that mean?
What a setup,
Yeah,
huh?
what exactly does, get that into for me a little bit more.
So the background for this, and we've been living it, right, is as businesses become media companies, whether they like it or not, the theory is they've moved beyond having to buy access to audience and buy attention with dollars or pounds or euros to being able to attract audience with their content, with their expertise, with their know-how, with their white papers, with their webcasts. And as we scale this up, we have to start treating that content as not just nice to have, but really the currency in this sort of content economy. And that's really the theory, is this has been building over time. And if you buy into that, number one, then let's start treating it as really an asset, and let's start looking at how do we invest our content, how do we look for vehicles to have a greater return on that content, kind of the return on asset, return on equity. And it's sort of an interesting idea that we all are in this business, and if you treat that content as really an asset, as the currency in this social mobile world, then we can start to make smart decisions about what types of content that we create. What types of content do we curate, to the discussion just a couple of minutes ago? How do we distribute it? How do we syndicate it? Where do we place our bets in terms of getting the best return on that content?
So let me ask you this, and Seth, you could jump in on this as well. Where do companies start? And all, because that's one of the things that we actually hear quite often is, people come in and companies start and say, okay, well, I just spent a ton of money on this new CMS. Where do I start with my content strategy? In your eyes, where do you start? Is it creating content? Is it defining who your audience is? What are your thoughts? Is it writing the story?
What's interesting is almost taking a page out of the social playbook, which is let's listen to the audience, let's listen to our customer, let's listen to the market in terms of what types of questions they have, what types of information are they looking for, what types of how-to videos would be helpful. I think if we start by listening, which is good practice, whether we're building a content strategy or a social media strategy, then we can start to identify the types of assets we want to create, as well as the ones that we might want to curate, and then basically start build kind of our media plan for how we roll out that content on what channels, with what frequency, to drive the behavior that we want. And then it starts to sound like a process which feeds nicely, I think, where sort of social marketing fits into content marketing, fits into content management is, as people scale this up, you have to have a place for that content to live and to have it updated and to have it delivered and authored and checked. All of a sudden it sounds like social media and social marketing may just smash right into content management.
Sure.
I was just say, you on board with this? Or are you saying
absolutely.
No?
I'm thinking about like content as currency and the depreciation of content as well, where you're investing a lot to build this reserve of currency and making sure it's current, meaning it's got high value, and also archiving content that's no longer useful and kind of working that out of the rotation and maybe refreshing it up. And it's a lot of work to, well, if content is currency and your creative process is your mint, you're going to be, right? you need to be creating a lot of content because it's worth your while.
It's interesting thinking about the whole economic side of it. Yeah. Can you have content inflation then in terms of when you have to create more and more content with sort of diminishing returns? Which, if people talk about sort of the overload of information and in certain social channels, even on the web, that maybe that's what's happened, right? Is so much content. It makes it harder and harder to get attention when people have to sift through all the different offers and all the different campaigns. So there's a lot of different ways that you can take this. Now what's interesting is go back to kind of the advertising world. Clearly this is also being driven by this sort of shift from paid media to more of a focus on earned media and owned media. So the properties I own, the places where I can place my content because it's useful, not because I'm buying space or I'm buying advertising. And if you look at that back to sort of the basics of marketing or advertising, we talked about what reach and frequency. So we want to buy attention, we want to buy audience, and we want to reach certain audiences, and we want to do it at a certain frequency. It's sort of the psychology. We have to touch people a certain amount of times, deliver the message before they get it or they want to redeem their coupon. In the social world, and this is very interesting, is it's less about reach and frequency and more about reach and participation. And so how can we get people to engage with us on their Facebook page?
That's that word engagement that we continue to talk about.
Exactly, and that's, I think, people haven't necessarily connected those dots. That why do we want to engage? It's not just so we can get to know people, get to know our customers, but if we get them to engage, and they're influential, right? It's not just anybody engaging, but it's also the people who are the best people to engage. So ideally, like in B2B, it's the influencers, the people, the tastemakers, the people who advise other companies on what products to buy. If we can get those people engaging and they're influential and they can activate their network and you create word of mouth, what's cool in social, like a great social campaign, if you focus on that participation, what does it do? It actually creates more reach. So in the traditional way, we have to buy for that additional, sort of buy more spots or buy more campaigns. In the social world, if we have a campaign that sort of goes viral, we don't actually have to buy that presence. We see that on Facebook. Remember when GM was reducing their advertising on Facebook, it made a big fuss. And then Ford jumped in and they talked about how they would launch certain campaigns on Facebook and they would do paid support and then they would back off because the campaigns actually took off on their own. They didn't have to really advertise anymore. Now the campaign basically spread by word of mouth and they just fed it with content. You also look at what GM talked about, and I remember we talked about this on Market Science, is GM, they're not going to advertise as much on Facebook. Oh, that means Facebook doesn't work. No, it means that they were going to invest more in content creation and less in advertising on Facebook, and I think it supports the whole idea that they realized that their good content, a good contest, a compelling story, was in fact as important as the dollars that they could spend.
Sure. So after a certain point of priming the pump, your investment shifts heavily from the distribution, the ads and getting it out there, to the quality of the content, and because you built your own audience, and if you can get them quality content or things that they find entertaining or useful, the distribution is taken care of for you.
See, I think that's right, and that would be an example like at a campaign level, right, where you might have to sort of front end load with paid media. Yep. So we're going to launch a program or we're going to launch a new community. Before the audience is kind of assembled, we have to buy some ads and we have to promote those events or the community happenings. And then over time, the community kind of takes that on. If it's compelling, right? If you've tapped into shared interest, then they're going to tell their friends and so on and so on. Now, it's interesting. I'm glad you brought up this sort of mix, right? Go back to your investment strategy. So if content is currency and we need to have sort of an economic plan for our content, what's the right mix of time that we spent on creating versus curating versus distributing versus syndicating?
But even so, start with the creation process, because I think a lot of people look at that and you say, okay, you're talking about GM here. Most companies and corporations aren't GM. Maybe this is a massive conglomerate we're talking about here, but talk about a small B2B company that happens to be down the street, and they're starting to say, okay, well, yeah, he's talking about General Motors here. I don't have the budget to create all this grand amount of content that we hope goes viral. How do you reduce, reuse, recycle, if you will, in a sense?
Well, it's funny because there's lots of good small business examples. I mean, knowing your market. So there's a company that we've worked with, in the building space. Their audience is interested in how to sort of do-it-yourself information. They're interested in how do I, pick the right insulation for my attic. You could think of all the questions that they have where they're going to look to that provider, not just as they can come to my house and put on my addition or fix my roof, but I'm going to go to their website or their blog or their Facebook page to learn about getting ready for winter, winterizing my house, how to pick the right, insulation. That's all ways that business has content that has value to their audience, that if they present that out, all of a sudden it's a different discussion, right? You're not talking about, we want to do this work for you. You're talking about, well, if you're doing it yourself, here's the tips, here's the video that you want to watch. And I think it's a much different conversation, just the same way why, I buy a lot of stuff from Home Depot, but I spend a lot of time in our local hardware store, not necessarily because I'm buying stuff, and I will. I sort of save my big ticket purchases for them because I go there and I get great advice. Sure. And I'll go in there and I'll ask questions about my lawnmower, and they're not making any money, but yet they're helping me. And then when I'm ready to buy a grill, I could maybe spend a little bit less at Home Depot, but I'm going to reward that information, that content. They essentially built up some credits in terms of providing useful information to me, and I'm going to reward it with my business when I want to buy a big ticket item.
All right, so we're going to have more Alan Bonde in just a few seconds, but we're going to take a very quick break. Coming up in a few seconds, we're going to be talking more about social, more how it's integrated with your site, really page building and things like that, and definitely some of the metrics that you can be taking a look at. And we're also going to be going in the spotlight in just a few moments. That's coming your way right here on CMS Connected.
Businesses today demand a powerful web content management and online marketing platform that can provide the best value at an affordable price with unlimited website possibilities. Kentico, the .NET Enterprise Marketing Solution and web content management platform of choice, powers more than 12,000 websites in over 84 countries, which means you get a stable, well-tested solution. Fully loaded with over 350 web parts and controls and more than 80 extensible modules. Kentico provides you with a fully integrated solution for building your online presence and running successful online marketing campaigns. It allows you to quickly launch an effective B2B or B2C site, intranet, online store, or branded online community, fully integrated with Facebook and Twitter. Organizations need to be more effective at catering to the personalities of their site visitors and the way they consume information. Sites need to more dynamically adjust to each site visitor to optimize their experience. Kentico EMS delivers a complete customer experience management platform that provides all of the necessary capabilities for interactive marketing, from planning and conception through optimization and execution. And lastly, analysis. Gain the insight required to analyze your marketing performance. Align the content, execution, and analytics critical for successful interactive campaigns, speeding delivery, and optimizing return on investment. With a fully integrated set of online marketing tools, Kentico EMS can improve your online marketing efforts, which allows you to focus on what's important, making your business successful. Test drive Kentico EMS today to get a complete appreciation of all its powerful features and capabilities.
All right, everyone, welcome back to CMS Connected here on thepulsenetwork.com. I'm Tyler Piper. We're talking about social media and social media's integration with, content management system. We're joined by Alan Bonde, the CMO of the Pulse Network, as well as Seth Gottlieb of Lionbridge. And so, Alan, we were talking before the break. We were talking about how content is currency, and we were talking about the different ways that a company, SMB, enterprise, how they can try to take advantage of, say, their FAQ page and turning those into, different blog posts, different types of tweets, different videos that can then helps with link building, helps with creating more pages, which will definitely help with the SEO part of it all. Now, let's talk about the metrics behind it, because that's one thing I think a lot of people kind of get stuck on. Say, all right, I've created all this content. I've got 30,000 likes on Facebook. What does it all mean?
What does that mean? Is that useful or not?
How can we make sense of that, really?
So it's interesting because I think metrics are going through sort of a transformation when you talk about social marketing, and in a way we're sort of blending some of those metrics with some of the content marketing, content management metrics as well that for first level are more kind of audience building. So the traffic, the clicks, the likes, the views, the tweets, I mean, those are good to know that people are sort of activating those channels, but they're not really meaningful in terms of, are we creating the behavior that we want? I mean, the things that we like to look at are, are people signing up? Are we attaching offers to some of these social campaigns? Are they signing up? Are they downloading a white paper? So are they starting to get closer to raising their hand that they're not only interested, but maybe they have intent to purchase something? I think attaching those to social media are really important. The next level would be, and this is more, whether it's a social metric or whether it's a content metric, is what content is being shared? And I think this goes back to a comment I made earlier, is if you really want social media and social marketing to work, you have to create word of mouth, right? You need people to spread the word, spread your story. You have a great story, but it's better when your customer tells your story. Can we measure sort of the shareability, if that's a word, of your content, and use that information to create more content that gets shared and less of the types of content that basically just sort of sits there and doesn't really create that sort of interactivity? To me, that's, people really care when they share. And if we measure that sharing and then we create more content expressly to get sharing, then we have more of a programmatic approach to doing these campaigns.
It seems like there's different types of sharing, though, because there's a share because you thought this little thing was silly or funny,
For
and
sure.
you got a show, and
Yep.
maybe there's a very loose tie-in with the company, the brand behind it,
Yes.
which maybe has some value. There's some brand recognition, just an impression, and then there's a share because there was actual use that's or utility that's related to the business that the publisher is in.
Absolutely.
Like the your building example of a how-to. Well, you share that to someone who's also interested in doing these types of projects and says, well, now I know how to do it. I still don't have the time. Maybe I'll hire these guys to do it because they know how to do it. So, I mean, it seems like there's a big difference in how do you segment those sharings. I guess it's by the content type, or I don't know, like.
Well, it's interesting. It's a really great point because there's very easy. I mean, oftentimes we thought about make it very easy to share, so click a button.
Yeah.
Now, but is that meaningful in terms of how much investment did I make to click that button? To your point, maybe it's just this is cute or this is kind of fun, so I'm going to click that button. But if you could invite, have an invite button, if you will, where you invite a friend to an event that you're going to, all of a sudden that's a little bit more commitment.
Sure.
And if you're a small business and you're trying to recruit people, say, into your showroom, and you have an event for your VIP customers, and they can invite 5 friends, all of a sudden that's that's
Sure.
a piece. You have a short video that's going to tell them how fun it is. Now, if they can invite their friends and the friends opt into also wanting a ticket, then all of a sudden that's a little bit more participation. So I think you're absolutely right that there's different levels of sharing.
I actually saw very recent was a camera company, a small, very SMB style camera company that actually, the way you were able to win a prize, which a brand new camera that hasn't even come on the market yet, was, well, yes, if you like this, you get 1 point and you get 1 name entered into the drawing. But for every person you invite, and every time they invite someone, you're then getting more, and then they're getting more, and then you continue on with that process, and you're actually growing the audience, to your point. You're continuing to grow and spread and share that content.
So that kind of a referral model is actually becoming pretty popular even on Facebook, where you get sort of tickets or credits or entries,
Yeah.
and then the more people you get, if you invite more people, we've used that at IMS, where we had a VIP program where if you referred 3 or more people to the event and then they signed up, then you qualified for certain things. So I think that's really important. The other thing would be, and this is very related to the content, is the video content, for example, that you create and you deliver on your various properties. If you motivate people, say, to embed that video in their own blog post, so they're going to essentially take that content, we see this every day, and they're going to write a post around it, and they become almost a syndication partner for you.
Sure.
That to me is also you can make that easy, but that indicates that there's enough value in it that they wanted to almost make that content their own. That to me is a great signal that they're interested in having a conversation, learning more. They're essentially becoming your agent to represent your story, your content, your how-to information.
Yep.
So I think there's definitely ranges of sharing, but overall we need to think about sharing as maybe one of the most important metrics.
So let me ask you this last question about this, because this is the part that I think it gets really interesting, specifically in the CMS world, because okay, we're taking a video, like you just said, and we're putting it up on YouTube, or we're putting it up on Vimeo, wherever we happen to put it. We're taking a tweet, and that lives on Twitter, or we have a Facebook post that lives out on Facebook. Well, me as a company, yeah, it's great to have those conversations all over the place, but I eventually want people to come to my website. How do we change that? How do we say, as opposed to just having, well, I've got a little module that we're running that has all our Facebook posts. We've got a little add-on for Twitter. This is all well and good, but talk about one of the things that I've actually heard you talk about, the whole goal and the whole concept and idea behind the outpost marketing, because I think that takes it to another point, doesn't it?
Well, it's interesting because at the end of the day, and this is kind of what we did in the early days of web, is how do we attract the visitors to our website, and then we'll get them to sign up for something. In a way, we've kind of come back to that idea where if there's enough rich, fresh, interesting, engaging, authentic content in all the different forms that we want that we're managing, again, this is, it requires infrastructure to do that, there's ways to draw people back to your site or your outpost, right? The difference between your site sort of being branded as your company versus an outpost that might be an off-brand. So you're sponsoring like Intel and Pulse on Personal Cloud. We've created an outpost for them, but the goal is to get the audience to that outpost and then to share and to consume and to find unique content. How do you serve that content in a programmatic way and keep it fresh back to the sort of currency economic model? That's exactly what we're talking about. But it may not actually be your website. It may be a website that you're sponsoring or that you're powering.
Nike has the Rise Above campaign with Michael Jordan. I mean, it's something very similar to that, and they have all the content, whether it's curated or created internally, and they have that all living in one point. However, it's kind of like that microsite. It's still, you feel like you're on Nike.com. You have that idea, and you know that, all right, this is Nike stuff, this is Nike's content.
But what draws people there, right, they're going to come for that great content. And I think this is one of the lessons, whether it's a microsite or your homepage, is to get people to come for the content and then sort of stay for the community. And I think everybody needs to think that way, whether you're a community site or not, is that people will get attracted for, download this paper, watch this unique video, come in and get this how-to guide. But they're going to stick around if not only they get more of the same, but mostly they're going to stick around if they can have discussions, whatever that means, with people who are like-minded or people who can help them. So I think that's the bottom line for me, is sort of as content meets social marketing, think about, content drives that initial audience, it's your currency, but then think about how you can really build and assemble a community that then not only will spread the word, but also will be a reason for people to come back. They're going to come back to a great party, not because you had in a great venue, but because they want to meet the people that they met the first time.
Yeah, true. I like that. Good analogy. I'm all about the party analogies. Awesome. Great stuff, as always, Alan. I know I'll be catching up with you soon because you sit like right across from me throughout the day. So
I'll try to pay attention.
Oh, you know each other. Oh.
Yeah, we kind of know each other. Awesome. Good stuff. Alan Bonde, the CMO of the Pulse Network. Big thanks to him. But now we have to go in the spotlight for... We're talking about Drupal today. Drupal, open source content management platform. We've actually been talking about Drupal quite a bit the last couple of months, to be honest with you. It's a platform powering millions of websites, applications. It's built, used, supported by a pretty active and diverse community of people around the world. And joining us actually right now via Skype to take an in-depth look at Drupal from Falcon Software, we'll welcome in Stephen Medvey. Stephen, welcome in. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day in Toronto, and I'm really enjoying the sunshine.
I love it. Good to hear. Okay, so let me ask you this: what's this little unknown CMS called Drupal? What's it really all about?
Well, let me tell you. Back in my college days, Drupal was the first open source CMS framework that I was introduced to. I was really blown away by what I could do with it back then. If I got stumped on a technical issue, I knew I could post that problem on Drupal forum and really get quickly like 10 responses to my question almost immediately. So what's important for Drupal, I find, is that if you believe the numbers that's on the Drupal website today, there's about 630,000 plus members. That's really a massive, massive support channel.
So, let me ask you this. Are you at this point in time, are you using Drupal right now?
No, I haven't really touched it. It was a great platform for me to learn on. But really, since I've moved into the workforce, I haven't really used the framework at all.
You can't set it up and tell me how great it was and how much you love the support community and then say, no, I'm not using it anymore. Why is that?
Overall, in my opinion, large organizations that were looking to select a CMS were really hung up on the open source software not having long-term support, long-term shelf life. In the end, it didn't matter whether Drupal was license-free or how quickly you could get your site up. It really mattered more to a client that their software was going to be around and supported 10 years from now. And having someone who could phone for that support, it wasn't really good if that support was coming from somebody's basement.
Okay, so with that in mind, I mean, you said 10 years. I'm going to use that. I mean, Drupal's been around for 10 years up to this point in time. I mean, would you say that they're kind of starting to move into that larger organizational space at this point?
Well, it depends on who you talk to and what you want to do with Drupal. If you're trying to compare and understand Drupal to other out-of-box vendors, you're not thinking like a Drupalite. Drupal is a framework that allows you to take advantage of this really, really large open source community. You can find pretty well thousands upon thousands of modules within the community on just about any type of functionality requirement that's out there to get a website up and running. With that said, there is some core functionality that I can quickly talk about within Drupal 7, which is the flagship product. First, they've really moved away from these old antiquated themes that came out of the box and have upgraded to a more user-centric themed approach like 7 or Bartik. The really amazing feature in Drupal 7, in my opinion, is the jQuery integration directly into the core. They've really standardized that UI component of jQuery. If you're a front-end developer, it's really, really easy to maintain and spin up those jQuery components like tabs, accordions, special effects, maybe some slide controls, etc. The other big feature is the Content Construction Kit, or CCK. It's in the core integration for Drupal 7. It used to be something you'd have to purchase separately. So say, for instance, you have to build a product review page, which can consist of a lot of fields, the same fields over and over again. So if you have an image field, a text field, a video field, you can really get that information onto a page exactly the way you want it by defining the fields, and you do that through the Content Construction Kit.
So, I mean, let's go one step further. I mean, where is it and where isn't it going to be a good fit? I mean, give me some of those nuts and bolts.
Well, number one, it's free.
True.
So there is no licensing fee attached to Drupal, which is why you just see so many educational and nonprofit organizations using it. And Drupal just keeps increasing that huge community. On the flip side, that doesn't mean that it's free to deploy. And this is where I really bring in customize versus configure. In a licensed product that has out-of-the-box functionality, you can try and configure that functionality to do what you're trying to accomplish, and it really may only get you about 90% of the way there. But if you're working within the framework like Drupal, you can customize that functionality to do exactly what you want and do it and customize that functionality to meet the exact requirements you're looking to do. The main downside for me is the thousands and thousands of modules that aren't supported under one company umbrella. And it's really going to make it extremely difficult to manage if you have a lot of third-party customized pieces to that website.
I mean, with that in mind, I mean, can you actually avoid that? Because that's a pitfall for a lot of companies out there. I mean, can you actually avoid that, and how can you do that, really?
If you're going to go down the road of Drupal, down that Drupal road, if you're going to need a Drupal partner or an integrator that can get you from point A through to Z and really support the project, you're going to be looking for a company, say, like Acquia. They have a huge support model for Drupal. What I like about Acquia is that they've really developed the tools and the modules to help support any Drupal product. And at the end, it's such as cloud support, they've got SaaS model support, and then, they've even got social community support now.
Awesome. Stephen, pleasure as always, my friend. Good talking with you, and we'll catch up soon, all right?
Take care.
Excellent. He's Stephen Medvey of Falcon Software. Big thanks to him taking time out of the day to jump on the show with us. So with everything he just said, Seth, kind of give me your wrap-up of Drupal and your thoughts.
Well, web content management isn't always a enterprise-wide decision for all companies. They might have a centralized WCMS that they buy as an enterprise, but then they have all these subgroups that also need their own websites and maybe don't need the oversight and control from the parent company. And that's where Drupal seems to make its greatest inroads. And I think that departments, and it could be sub-brands or it could be like regional divisions, they will adopt Drupal, and they're very encouraged by the successes that Drupal has had in media. So, The Onion was the first big website to go Drupal, and they're no longer on Drupal anymore, but they've really stabilized the platform and made it high performance. So then other media companies like CNN and Time Interactive and Sony Music, all the musician websites, they're all running on Drupal. So any type of scalability objection is pretty much invalidated with that. So then you have large corporations with subgroups, and then you have like Intel and J&J. There's a lot of companies that have Drupal pockets in the enterprise, and the way it spreads is not a top-down, but when you have one business unit succeeding with Drupal, and another business unit hearing about it, and it kind of goes horizontally through the organization. And then you have managed services companies like Acquia that does development and also manage and host service, so that deals with any objections about security and things like that. And Acquia, and there are also other companies that do it as well, the controlling IT kind of runs out of objections after a certain point.
So last question about Drupal, really. I mean, we heard Stephen talk about how, they've been around for 10 years. They've been around the block now. They've 7 is supposed to be their game changer at this point in time. What does the future hold, really? In your thoughts?
Well, I think it's going to continue to be adopted by any type of media company. Because media companies look to their peers and they see their peers succeeding with the platform.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that some of the companies.
We heard Alan say every company's a media company at this point
That's
in time.
true.
So
that's
now
true.
I guess
And maybe that's their end run. When every company becomes a media company, every company becomes a Drupal file or whatever you call it.
One way or another.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I love it. So that right there, folks, was in the spotlight, all about Drupal. Make sure you take a look at CMS-Connected.com. You'll be able to see some of the great segments about who, in fact, was in the spotlight. But now we do have to move on. And, Seth, we're going to put you to the test today. We're going to have a little fun. So this is where you can channel your inner Scott Lieber today. We could have a little fun with this. And we're going to be moving on to rapid fire. We basically put a couple minutes up on the clock, and we'll let you kind of run through some of the bigger segments out there and kind of give us some commentary surrounding the CMS industry. So the very first thing we're going to go ahead and talk about is hitting the mark. Now, companies that know their audiences really do really well, and as they take time to learn about their customers and deliver accordingly, it reveals honestly genuine care and focus on providing solutions. Same goes with social media, as we talked a little bit earlier. Now, the key is to know where your audience is, as we mentioned before, how you're going to have to want to engage with them on that platform at that given time, and to have meaningful conversations with them. Explain that a little bit for me.
Well, this article is particularly about the sales presentation, which I'm particularly. I've been through those, so I would like the vendors to read this article. But I think that it's interesting because they used to say that that marketing was talking and selling was listening, and maybe that distinction has turned around, because now when you're marketing, you should be listening as well. I guess
Make
that's
that point.
Do I get a full minute? Or
you get a full
what are the
minute
rules
for this. See, I should have explained the rules a little bit better.
Okay.
But you know what? We don't need to channel.
We can move right on
just yet. We'll have to unbutton a couple buttons down and shave our heads and get a couple muscles. And
I know.
We'll
I got to work
talk
on that.
like Scott for the day. We'll have to be from New York. All right. Let's move on to the second one. Enterprise web content management is broken at this point in time. An article on contentmanagement.com actually claims that the traditional web content management systems are actively failing for enterprise systems. The reason lies in the complexity of enterprises, multiple digital channels, varied content, as we continue to talk about, many contributors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, it is the inability of the enterprise systems to move rapidly, and those continue to change, which is unacceptable in the new digital marketing area, as we just heard a few minutes ago. Kind of give me your thoughts on this article in particular.
Yeah, well, around 15 years ago, I guess it was probably 15 years ago, web content management decided it was going to be an enterprise software business, and it was going to sell one big license to the enterprise, and there would be universal adoption of that platform. And they even went so far as to think that, well, content management is content management, so you can sell one license and that will handle web content management, document management, digital records management. And we know that failed, that there was a reasonable delineation between the different disciplines of content management. I think that what we're seeing is it's really hard to sell one global solution to an entire business, especially larger businesses that typically get broken down. They get broken down by budget. So like who's paying for this global type of system. And they also get broken down by their individual strategies because they all have their P&Ls and they all have their goals, and they need the autonomy to be able to manage their own website as they need to. And then you get into this kind of inevitable control of the top-down infrastructure enforcing controls on the sub-business units, and the conflict between complexity and simplicity and autonomy versus control, and it just gets to be impossible. So the business units tend to go out and buy their own solution and then build their own websites as they need, rather than waiting for a monthly or quarterly release cycle for them to get the feature to launch the website that they need to. So they need more control over their web property, and it's hard to do that. And if you have one type of system, you have to think about like release cycles and externalities. When you make a change to one, does it break everything else? It gets really, really hard to manage all this.
All right, let's move on to the next one. We're going to be talking about a comeback for Movable Type. Now, Movable Type looking forward to regaining its position in North America with the release of Movable Type 5.2 last month. It's an all-in-one social publishing platform, and it recently celebrated actually 11 years, and it has launched a few plugins that range from complex to simple solutions. They're kind of trying to run that gamut, all of which work towards a goal of making the platform more user-friendly. Good move, yes?
Well, I saw them come in during CMS Expo last year, and I have to say that I was very, very skeptical because in their absence, a lot has happened. WordPress has gotten super huge, and it just became like it's on the tip of like a small to mid level marketer's tongue. Like that's what they think about when they're wanting to deploy their website. And then you have Drupal that we were talking about. So you had this explosive growth of their two competitors in their absence. How are they going to catch up? Now, it strikes me that the only way they could catch up is not by the quality of the product so much, is by enticing agencies and developers to go onto the Movable Type platform and start to build sites on top of that. And that is really, really hard to do. Joomla was successful with it, Drupal and WordPress, where you kind of have theme clubs that you can share and work on those. I think that's the only chance Movable Type has to start to compete again at that level.
Excellent. So let's move on. Let's talk about web content management possibly diminishing. Yes, according to Gary Brooks, API strategist at the General Services Administration's Digital Services Innovation Center, the CMS platforms might be replaced by APIs as more and more agencies are really shifting to focus less and less on web CMSs and now more on some of those APIs. And it's believed that crafting APIs is far more important than actually focusing on the web platforms themselves, as the users can actually get to the content through some of these APIs. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. This is a super ambitious plan. I think that when you're having this change to have all these different departments manage content in a similar enough way that everything is interoperable with APIs, I think that's ambitious. I wasn't quite sure with the article if they were talking about, well, what's being swappable? Is it the management interface, or is it the presentation tier? It sounded like it was the presentation tier, where you have all these different management processes feeding content into a common website or common presentation tier. That is pretty ambitious type of stuff, especially when you think about like the time frame that they're working with, usually focused on like a political type of cycle. So I'm a little bit skeptical, but if they were able to put a man on the moon, presumably they can solve that problem as well.
I love it, and just wanted to note to Jade Carter, we're going to be able to make sure we send you that article. What is the link that Seth actually just mentioned a few moments ago? So we're going to make sure we send that article to you as well. So let's go on to the very last point that we have to touch upon today, and that is adapting web content for mobile. It's something we actually talked a little bit about earlier on in the show. And mobile, it's obviously become one of the most popular channels delivering and accessing information. I mean, it's in your pocket. It's an arm's length away, really, especially in the B2C marketing world. Now, a recent report from the Aberdeen Group revealed that companies that optimize their mobile web content for the consumers outperform by 80% in web traffic than those that don't, have 15% higher customer satisfaction, and also have their marketing efforts contribute 56% more to the company revenue than others. Those numbers are ridiculous, Seth.
I know, that's just insane. We all know mobile is not going away. I didn't think we needed any evidence of that, but those are still like gaudy numbers to justify any type of investment in mobile. And I would have to agree. I think that half the time you're looking up things, you're in a situation where you're not by your big computer and you're working on a tablet. So it's not just phones, but it's also tablets, and you're trying to achieve something and learn about the company, trying to get something done. And if the company hasn't thought about you in that context, it's a little bit of an insult and it's an inconvenience. So absolutely, the companies that have jumped ahead here, this is the trend that was the big payout in terms of trend jumping and things like that. So I totally support that research, or I agree with that.
All we need to do is shave your head and give you a little bit more of a tan.
I know. I gotta go do Scott school. Go in the Scott vacation yeah.
There you go. Scott will be back next time, but I promise you we'll have Seth on again for sure. Seth, honestly, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time out, coming out here, joining us on the show, and helping me along the process.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
Excellent stuff indeed. That's going to be all the time we have for today. I want to thank everybody for joining us here on CMS Connected. Make sure you tune into our December show, which will be focused on our annual review, which is all about how to select a CMS for your organization. Make sure you mark your calendars. Finally, I'd like to thank Falcon Software and Digital Clarity Group, our sponsors, for really making this entire show take place. And on behalf of my co-host, Seth Gottlieb, and our special guest, Alan Bonde, I'm Tyler Piper, and this is CMS Connected on the Pulse Network. We'll see you in December. Have a good one.